Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Day 4 at Eurosatory. You have seen a lot of cannons, drones, tank trucks, and now the moment you are all waiting for, the financing of the defense industry. I'm not kidding, financing all these military supplies is essential for peace and in danger, and that's what we are going to talk about today. I'm Timothée Gagé, founder and CEO of ARTCHER, communication and public relations firm. And as a global influence company, we deal with subjects that are at the frontier of industry, tech, and public opinion. And precisely, the financing of defense industry brings together all these issues. So I want to thank the COGES for asking us to set up this conference. And this edition of Eurosatory, at the time of a tragic war is raging on Europe's doorstep, I'm sure will have a special resonance. So I'm glad to welcome around the table 3 top specialists working in 3 different European countries. General Boyard, after a career at the highest level of the French Army, you joined ARTCHER as a special advisor of ARTCHER CEO. And as everybody knows, ARTCHER is one of the world's leading manufacturers of defense trucks. Gian Domenico De Martini, you are head of business. Bonjour. You are head of business development and market intelligence as IDV, formerly known as Iveco Defense Vehicles. And IDV is a brand of Iveco Group, an Italian company, which has established its reputation for the practical application of innovative automotive and protection solutions. And then Lucas Lebel, CEO and founder of Cerber, the French leader in anti-drone solutions and drone detection system. And we can all agree that drone became a key element in the battlefield. So we are all gathered here to talk about financing the defense industry. And I suggest we do it in 3 parts. First, let's take an overview on the cultural differences between countries and how they manage the defense industry. Second, we are talking about the obstacles that the European defense industry is facing, and talking more precisely about export, regulation, taxonomy, public opinion, ESG criteria. And third, we will discuss how sustainability impacts finance regulation. So let's start with the cultural aspects. My first question goes to you, Lucas. So you are, I say, the CEO of a French leading anti-drone company. And as every startup, you had to obtain fundings to launch your project and scale up fastly. So according to you and your just past experience, what are the biggest cultural difference between the European way of thinking and the US one?
Okay, good morning everybody. Thank you very much Timothée for having me today. I'm going to try to talk from my personal experience having built Cerber, so a young company that is about 7 years old now, and indeed a former startup. I think the cultural bias are huge depending on the country that you're considering. Within the European Union, of course, but especially when you cross oceans. We got lucky enough to do a little bit of business in the US, and I was shocked by the differences, not judging one or the other, but by the amount of differences, cultural differences that shape the business and in the end affect the way that the companies get funded. So one of the first biases that we had to deal with was the perception of the general public, the public opinion, right? I tried to find data to substantiate my general feeling about this, and I found that in the US, for instance, about 75% of people consider the use of military force to be necessary to maintain order in the world. That figure in Europe is dramatically lower. If you analyze Germany, for instance, that has a different history, different socio-economic factors that blend in, it's only half of the population, a little bit lower than half of the population that agrees with that statement. For the rest of Western European countries, it's around 55-60%. The bottom line of all of this is that the acceptance of the necessity of having a defense industry differs on the country that we consider. And the bottom line is that the people who fund this industry, whether you're talking about the government or talking about like the banks, for instance, they should actually translate this general public opinion on what is necessary to fund or not. And this is exactly what we observe. In the US, generally speaking, of course, it's a generality. It depends a lot on the underlying investment that we're considering. Access to funding feels a lot easier. That's one of the biases. Another one is our relationship to the concept of innovation. When we went to the US, we got invited by DARPA. We did some business as well with the forces. Being a startup is actually, it's something considered sexy. It's innovative, it's fresh, it makes things move forward. It's something considered to be positive. Being a startup in the defense industry in Europe, and especially in France, I would argue is a burden. But most of the time it's considered to be not so serious, very fragile, kind of like do it yourself, so no future basically. And that bias as well translates in the way that the company will get contracts or not. And what are you looking for when you invest, when you fund a company? You want to make sure that you get return on investment. So what happens when the actual underlying, the company has some bad prejudice to cope with? You have kind of like a glass ceiling of things that the company might have trouble to achieve, commercially speaking. So another reason why, another cultural bias why it's a little bit harder to get funding. I'm talking especially for the young companies. It's different as well. It's different, of course, for ARTCHER or Thales or any of these large companies. The third one that I thought about is as well a very deep and specifically French bias that deals with the way we consider risk and investment. I believe in France, for instance, we reward the avoidance of failures. I think we have an issue with failures. In the personal career of anybody, like an executive of a company, for instance, or perhaps a military officer, I believe that people climb up the ladders faster if they don't make mistakes. But if they do, sometimes it can actually prevent them from accessing to the next level. In the US, it's completely different. Failure is considered as a means to obtain success. And so, again, for young companies, it means that it's difficult to get contracts because the decision makers, like for instance somebody from an armament agency, having to choose between a large company that is considered AAA and a young company, will be bound to, everything being equal, to choose the big company, because if he fails, nobody will tell him, you picked Thales or whatever, you get it wrong. But if he fails at picking the startup, it might create some huge problems in here. And so defense industry is about technology. Technology is about innovation. Innovation is about being bold, taking bold decisions, ambitious decisions, creating companies, entrepreneurship. And in terms of funding, it's true that it's difficult. So here are three cultural biases that, in my opinion, kind of like shape the industry and explain some of the differences of access to finance between these two continents.
Thank you, Luca. John Domenico, as the head of market intelligence at IDV, you are an Italian working in an Italian firm. Do you agree with just what Luca said about the...
No, it's a very interesting point. I think it's a very interesting point and an angle. But maybe I'll try to give a bit wider answer or approach to the point. So,
yes, please.
We are an Italian company, right, but with a very wide international reach. So we have a good view of the differences we find in different countries in terms of, approaching the market and developing solutions. So each state, if we look at Europe, for example, each state has its own cultural heritage, history, way of doing things, geopolitical posture. So, and that's something that conditions the way the money is allocated, the way you can move forward. We do not believe that's going to change. But situation or the context is even more complicated than that, or more complex, which means we have transnational entities which have importance, absolute importance, like the NATO, for example. we have a tendency or a will to put the different positions together. If we think about the strategic compass, which has been recently released, that's a first attempt to combine different positions in Europe and somehow considering the different postures of the states, respecting them, but also giving a common guideline. So it's something that definitely we believe will allow the defense industry to move forward more effectively and joining forces. We, of course, hear about the European defense system. That's maybe one day will happen. It's really not a matter of one or two countries leading the others. It's a matter of finding, if possible, as much as possible, a common position to move forward. And I believe Europe is giving us a tool, which is, for example, the European Defense Funds. We started last year putting together different previous channels like the EDDP or other funded programs. The EDF is still a complicated tool to be used, but we believe it will be the way to move forward and includes startups. It actually is giving benefits or is giving more awards if you include small, medium enterprises, startups into an ecosystem, which is so big companies, multinational companies, national companies, so at all levels. And we believe this it is one of the best ways to create the ecosystem and to have the states on board, because the EDF call is based on the principle that you need to have at least, if I remember well, it's 3 states part of the call to be able to apply to it. So it's like putting together the customers, putting together the industries, putting together the innovation. And I forgot about the research center in universities. Those are parts of the ecosystem as well. So bottom line, still a lot of different positions, still a lot of different postures. Nevertheless, there is a trend, at least in, or a tendency, at least in Europe, to create a tool to combine everything and to be more effective, to allow everybody to be more effective into defense industry of tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. De Martini. General Bouaya, if we go back to the cultural approach, you were in the army. Did you notice huge differences between?
I think as a supplement to what has been said, we can elaborate a bit on the fundamentals. The security is the basement for the development of a society. So you have not sustainable development in a society without security. And this security is a task for the state. So it's cultural, it's also political in nature. And I think the differences that we can notice in what you call the cultural differences are very much related to this fact. The state has the responsibility for security. The tool for that will be, partly the defense industry, which allows him to have the equipment to provide the security, which is the baseline of the sustainable development. And then come the question of the sovereignty. Some states will rely on tools that they are monitoring, controlling, able to control, and other will not. And telling that it's not a criticism of either approaches. The state, especially in a Western world, not only Western Europe, in the US as well, we are basically living in a welfare state, contrary to warfare states, which means the security task is essential, but the effort to help and develop the society is equally essential for all government, states, or political systems. So there is a permanent balance, which bring some states to rely on foreign procurement, for instance, rather than having the effort to develop an own defense industry. And this makes the difference in culture, and it has also to do with the public opinion Gian Domenico was mentioning. You have different reasons why a state will rely on a national defense industry, and then comes into the logic of federating it through the tools like previously mentioned, EDF and so on, or being in a position, just like you mentioned previously, to develop on their own, like in the US, or for some countries, to turn towards more import or cooperation with foreign partners, but more as subsidiaries or as customer, almost political customers of other providers. So I think this makes the difference between the approach.
Well, it's a good transition to our second part, and because so we have a clear perspective on the fact that defense is very linked to the country's culture, but there are other obstacles that they seem to have several reasons that can explain that it's so difficult right now to find fundings and financing of the defense industry. You say geopolitical issues, banking frilosity, compliance, reputation risk, and we will have now a look at these different points and to see how the Russian invasion of Ukraine is changing this situation. And just linked to what you said, General, about export regulation, I really would like to have your point of view, because you are dealing with exports at ARTCHER. So what are the impact when we talk about financing an industry?
Well, specifically on regulations and export, first of all, it's quite obvious. Even in larger companies and industries, like in the US, for instance, there is a need to export, since the life cycle of the product, generally speaking, are such that there is no refurbishment every 10 years, like for cars or other products. It's more on the path of 30, 40 years. So in between, your defense industry always need to
You mean that
to export?
Even if a national army is buying supplies coming from a national industry, is not enough to finance.
Exactly.
So you need to export because you need to sell more and more trucks.
This is exactly the point.
Okay, forgot.
So you need to export. So, but it is not a normal business, as again, it's very obvious. So all in all, throughout the international community, there is a ban on selling arms and or bigger systems, I dare say, and the customers are always states. So you have a regulation. Typically in France, you are not allowed to export without being granted a license from the French government, and the system is very robust and very well. They are looking into the details, to what kind of equipment, to what kind of destination. You have a end user certificate to provide. In France, the decision is met by the services of the Prime Minister after consulting all the ministries. And it's a sort of a dialectical approach, since in everyday life you will usually have a different point of view between typically foreign affairs and industry. The Ministry of Industry is willing to support the national industry and to export, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to obey the treaties that were signed and have been signed, and to look that the reputation is not at risk of the country as a nation. So you have these very contradictory discussions within the government, which is not public, but which is a very good guarantee that the decision met is really very deeply balanced. So it's a very, very robust regime. And since, again, it's about security, it's about sovereignty, it's a responsibility, primarily responsibility of the national state.
Okay, thank you. Lucas, maybe there is a link between what you just said in introduction in the cultural difference between the US and France. On this specific aspect of exportation, what is your point of view?
Right, so, I mean, in my opinion, I agree with everything that was just said. I think we all agree that we all want to feel safe, right? And to do so, we need to have a performing defense industry. And having a performing industry means that we cannot be content with just the domestic market. Even if you consider Europe as a whole, it's too small of a market for it to compete with markets like China or the US. So it's a necessity. Let's be pragmatic. It's a necessity to export, to have technologies that are up to state of the art. So where do we go from there? We need export control. It's just, I mean, there's just no way around it. But having said that, I think it's important to acknowledge that, I mean, fundamentally, intrinsically, export control actually makes for an industry that is less appealing for investment, for funding. Before having built Cerber, I used to be a banker, and I worked for like 5 years in different bank, asset management, corporate finance, things like that. And in finance, they always say that what is important is the risk-reward ratio. Those are the two variables that you always analyze. What is the upside and what is my potential risk? What can I lose? And so export control, classification of the material, what it means is that because the technologies are so sensitive, we need to reduce the potentially addressable market for a particular manufacturer because of different stakes, right? If you reduce the potential addressable market, it means that you reduce the upside. If you put classification on material, again, you reduce the addressable market. You make a particular technology only purchasable by, let's say, law enforcement or the military. And of course, retail cannot buy it. So you reduce further, again, the addressable market. Having export control, having classification, having a complex and opaque industry with middlemen and potentially lethal equipment makes for a very risky approach at the same time. Sometimes there is a risk to work with a middleman that is not compliant, that perhaps is doing some money laundering. Perhaps you're going to make a genuine mistake about the classification of your material or about the export control that you require to do a particular trade. And it's, I mean, in my opinion, it's unfair in a way, especially for a young company. I mean, those stakes, those necessary steps are so important, and yet they can burn your company just like that. And finance people, they know that. The bankers know that. The investment fund know it. And so when they have two opportunities, they will compare the risk-reward ratio. And on one hand, in the defense industry, they'll be like, okay, well, because of this export control and classification that happens to be necessary, I agree with that. That risk-reward ratio is much less appealing than one that I could find in, let's say, e-commerce, app, retail, you name it. So although it's necessary, here is one of the reasons why it's less appealing to funding, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, if I understand well, the major stop or major financing accelerator, depending notably of if defense industry is falling or not in the regal domain. So, another break that we can notice is that the public opinion and the mediatic attention can be an obstacle or support when we are talking about financing defense industry. maybe I will start with General Boyard. You see that that public opinion has changed very quickly with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. In your point of view, does that mean that the performance of the defense industry is directly linked with the geopolitical and the situation? And what the public opinion is thinking about it?
Yes, undoubtedly there is a link, and not on the brutal performance, but like Lucas was mentioning, because of all the environment and the difficulties that are unleashed by such changes in the perception of the public opinion. Again, it's cultural, political, the responsibility of the government. So they have to they are accountable towards the population, towards the public opinion. It's very logical. It's not. It's to be taken as it is. We will not fight the settings. It's like that. What you are referring to is a trend we noticed prior to the Russian war in Ukraine, to ban some activities, typically in the defense industry. It was a very strong trend, presented as a generic necessity for the well-being of humanity, which you can understand as such. But in my opinion, a lot of ideology behind that, and typically the principal victim of this trend is the European defense industry. You do not have the same kind of problems on the other continents, in other countries. So, and very interesting, in a report 2 years ago by the French Parliament, Assemblée Nationale, the members of Parliament that issued this report noticed that the most violent NGOs, very vocal against French exports, for instance, were very silent towards other exports by other countries, even if the turnover of or the volume of equipment of those other exports were higher than what the French industry was doing in business with the same countries. So this is also a bit instrumental, I think. With Ukraine, we do not hear the kind of critics anymore, because those lobbyists understand that the public opinion sees the necessity of defense industry and of security and defense. But my opinion is that the same, the roots, the reasons why this campaign to ban activities or financing towards the defense industry, they will remain, and we will see that again 6 months from now or next year, once the war in Ukraine is over or frozen. We will have the same topics coming up again.
Okay, so just before we talk more specifically about communications, I would like your point of view, Lucas. So I just went so. On this matter, the general said that public opinion will change because of the war in Ukraine. Do you think it's just a parenthesis, an exception, but the opposition sorry about this. Said that the main cultural difference and the view of the public opinion is depending of the war. For example, in Iraq, in Syria, is not the same that the one they used to have for Ukraine.
This is just a personal opinion I'm expressing. I believe the main drivers are cultural biases that we discussed in the beginning. So, in my opinion, this is just a parenthesis. The situation, however, is different from the previous conflicts that we have experienced, again, because of cognitive biases. let's be honest, I mean, the soft power, the media, all of this is controlled by the West on a global scale. And over the past decades, all of the conflicts that we have witnessed were far away, and they were questioned a lot by different Western countries. France especially, remember what happened during the war in Iraq that was condemned by France. And as we discussed in the beginning, you can see that in Europe, the US being an exception in the West, the majority of the opinion is very slim to adhere to the thesis that we should send the military to maintain order. So if the conflict appears a little bit obscure or questionable because the public opinion doesn't know if it's about oil, if it's about Taliban, if it's about terrorist group, if it's about geopolitics, there will be a very vocal part of the population showing its discontent. But Ukraine is very different. The number one reason behind it is that this is happening at the doors of Europe. And so here is a conflict that makes the unanimity, pretty much unanimity, at least in the West, everybody agrees that it's kind of like a holy war. It shouldn't happen. Here is an independent state, Ukraine, that gets invaded for no reason valid whatsoever. And this is happening just a few hundreds of kilometers away from European countries. Hell, I mean, how many kilometers is that from Paris? Maybe 3,000 kilometers, something like this. It's ridiculous. And so this is one parenthesis where the whole public opinion adheres to the thesis that we need to fight back or we need to help the Ukrainians. And this is why I believe this is just temporary, because that conflict is exceptional in a certain way. But by the time the situation will revert back to the statu quo, I guess, I believe that the public opinion will revert back to its main driver, cultural biases, and they will condemn the defense again.
That's right. And the public opinion evolves very quickly, but regarding of what we hear, what we listen, when we watch, and even at ARTCHER, the communication agency, we all day long analyze the interdependence between media, social media, and public opinion. And actually, sometimes we don't understand whom is influencing the other. And specifically on this topic, I would like your point of view, Mr. De Martini. What is the impact of communication in this different area?
Well, first, I will make a couple of comments to reach
Please.
to this point. So, I fully agree about what has been said about export. For us, the export law is also a positive thing, in the sense that as industry, we want to minimize the risk or how our activity is perceived externally. So having the states, the government, that helps us understanding what is, for a number of reasons that we may not even understand, as we said before, what we can do and what is not allowed to do is definitely an help in many instances. Also, if we think about the dual use of solutions, so something that can be misused or used in a way which was not originally foreseen. As far as communication, well, public opinion counts always, everywhere, and counts for us as well. So the judgment of the public opinion versus what we do as industry of defense is there every day, amplified by social media, you name it, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere. And you need to consider that. It has an impact. Now, I do believe the war in Ukraine has just amplified that because of what Lucas said. I mean, there's a war in Europe. But many other wars have been there in the past, even in the recent past. And just because they were a little bit far away, that perception was not so strong. Now, the war is just amplifying everything. But again, the war is on communication as well. So you have, as you said, it's very complicated to understand who is influencing who. You have communication, you have counter-communication, counter-information, you have misinformation. So what we also have to do, I believe, as industry, is to start considering defense in a wider spectrum. So defending a country means also to be able to ensure that a certain number of information are proven. It's almost like to say everybody has the right to have an opinion and to say it. But it would be nice if we help the public opinion to have an informed opinion. So something which is based on, as much as possible, on facts and not other opinion. Because the social media is just helping to make a position out of the public opinion much more than in the past, and conditioning the politics, and ultimately conditioning the laws and the policies. So we saw it recently in a very clear way. So I believe it's very important to consider these in the general context. So to follow up what is going to happen from a communication standpoint, from a public opinion position, and to find a way. Could be through policies, it could be through regulation, it could be through different tools, to find a way to norm it as much as possible, and to make it kind of a normal part of life, normal part of the industry. So, and I close here. We have a long history. I mean, Iveco defense vehicle started in 1937, and we have the approach and the mentality for a long time. We have been a mentality of producing vehicle. Now, as defense industry is no longer producing vehicles, it's giving solutions 360 degrees, considering all the different aspects that we have to deliver. I can imagine for a startup, this is a huge thing, that you discover day by day, by the way, and having a support from authorities, from the state, from Europe, from different transnational authorities, that's a real support for doing it properly.
Thank you. Very interesting. You want to
yes, on public opinion and the war in Ukraine. I think this is we haven't had so many casualties on both sides in an armed conflict since the probably Iraq-Iran war in the 80s. You see the news. You have even the president of Ukraine had to admit that they were losing approx 200 soldiers a day. There's huge quantities. You have to figure out, and this is on both sides. So the public opinion are shocked or at least impressed, because of course you never saw was also what Luca was mentioning. You never saw such a conflict so close. So it's very logical that the public opinion. Nevertheless, you have two other lessons to be learned from Ukraine at this stage. The first, probably, is that for some actors, international actors, some nations, the war is a political occupation or a political way of producing effects, just like other ways of interacting between states. It's only in the Western world that we do not see that, but you have to consider the rest of the globe is not very vocal on the war on Ukraine, because it's not very clear whether they are condemning that way of proceeding in political interactions or not. This is an important point, because related to the public opinion is impressed, shocked, but the war on a military aspect, the war in Ukraine shows that quantity is a quality as such. It was always small is beautiful, but you can notice that large is useful. You have to have the quantity. And also in the industry, and perhaps less in a startup, but especially by manufacturer, you have very long lead times. And if you want to be ready with quantity in 2 to 5 years from now. We should almost start now. And even shocked, the public opinion is not in a position to have exert sufficient pressure at that stage towards their own governments to unleash a series of productions with the defense industry to prepare for the next war, so to say. So you have a lot of political statements, but hardly the beginning, apart from some countries, the beginning of a real movement.
That's really interesting. And of course, if the public opinion is changing his mind quickly, you cannot change as quickly as they change the way you build a defense industry. And it's perfect transition because, to be honest, when the COGES asked us to set up this conference, the main topic everybody was talking about was the taxonomy project made by the European Commission. And can you just tell us a few words about these projects and maybe how he's changed by the situation you described in Ukraine?
Yes, so we used to have, again, now suspended, but we used to have twofold. On one side was a sort of classification, taxonomy of defense industry activities in valuable activities, if you want so, in not positive activities, which is
was supposed to be classified with porn, gaming, and
exactly.
And other funny.
And on the other hand, with the called it the green taxonomy for sustainable financing, it was a company with more than I think it was 20%. Of the activity in the defense sector
that were
excluded from financing or not gaining the label, the eco label for financing. So this is temporarily suspended. Temporarily, I don't know, but this is what we were putting. So probably temporarily suspended, and I think that this is not the good approach. Again, I was putting in the beginning, security is the basement of the society. So you have no development, no sustainability without security, and in all cases, in the Western countries, without robust enough defense industry to procure this security. So my point of view, it should be the other way around. It is security, defense industry is a vital portion of sustainability. So, and of course, this kind of activity has to follow the ESG criteria with environmental, social, and good governance. And we could perfectly imagine not a ban, but on the contrary, having a specific label for defense industry, which is a sustainable activity or an activity providing sustainability to the society, just like for energy or development or whatsoever, and with environmental criteria for the defense energy, social criteria, social development criteria for the defense energy, defense industry, and governance criteria for the defense industry, and you would have then within the European institutions labels and labels to guarantee that all various companies respect, enforce those criteria.
Yes, you're right, and there is different thing actually because between taxonomy project and more global, which is just a project, and the ESG criteria, which is what we are living right now and facing right now. And many banks, investment funds, are deciding they will not support any kind of project that do not fit with ESG standards. So if they consider that the defense is not fitting, they will not financing the fund. Lucas, you were a banker actually before becoming one of the leader in anti-drone solutions. So maybe you can tell a few words about this ESG criteria and how the banker are dealing with them.
I mean, when I was still in the finance industry, like 10 years ago, I remember that bankers were very cynical about those labels. I'm going to be honest. It was a way for them to push forward some particular investment. So you had like a specific investment fund, and it had like some specific ESG label, but everybody knew that all of that was BS. You could find like an investment fund that had all the labels you could imagine, but looking inside of the underlying investment, you had a lot of like polluting companies, oil companies, child exploiting companies, but using subsidiaries, so it wouldn't look up on the accounts. And still, those funds would qualify and get the labels and get publicized and gather assets coming from the general public, because the general public is not informed, doesn't have the time to do their own due diligence and follows whatever the regulator is telling them. So if there is like a green label on it, then I might invest in it. And so bankers are very cynical about this. And I don't believe that within 7 to 10 years it has changed in any way. My take on this at this point is that it's very easy to get short-sighted, to become short-sighted with these particular norms. Of course, I'm all up for ESG, environment, social, protection of the environment, all of that stuff is absolutely necessary. But it's easy to get trapped at the micro level and inspect a company and be like, okay, maybe a little bit of pollution here above the threshold, maybe 90% of women in the workforce instead of like 20, 21. But what matters is the macro level. And I guess what's happening in Ukraine is a huge demonstration of that short-sightedness, right? On one hand, Europe is saying, we shouldn't invest in arms manufacturer or in defense industry, that's dirty. And then next thing you know, you see all of the world leaders, and especially the ones from Europe, concurring to the fact that it's absolutely necessary that we should help Ukraine. And now what happens is that we see in the news that there is a food crisis coming up because of that, because Ukraine is being invaded and the supply routes are being kind of like blocked or taken possession of by the Russians. There's a food crisis because of wheat shortage, because of oil shortage. There is, in a way, some people might say more pollution. Fossil fuel is traveling from all across the world to make up for the loss of the previous gas supply coming from Ukraine. The Germans are reopening some coal mines. And so here is the macro level, and here is the biggest impact, here is the big picture. And so it's a difficult approach, I agree with that, but I think this is what we should do. Once we try to evaluate the social impact and the necessity and the sustainability of one particular industry, we should not be trapped at the micro level, but encompass it within a bigger analysis.
Thank you, Ricard. Mr. Dumartini, do we have to change the ESG standards? Have they to evolve? What is the link between sustainability and defense?
Well, I agree with Lucas in when he says it was a kind of pre-concept about defense in the past. But if we want to be pragmatic, we look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is public. It's 17 pillars, and pillar number 16 is peace and strong institution and justice. So it's there. It means that, as General was also mentioning before, you cannot have a sustainable world if you're not in peace, if you're not getting stronger as an institution, and if you don't protect justice. So
But when we are talking about sustainability, I mean, public opinion are more thinking about ecology, social
Absolutely.
inclusion, governance.
absolutely, that's
So
where
you
I
are
think.
you are saying that they should also think about defense.
No, I'm saying that if you look at the 17 pillars, is almost like the focus has been very much on, and rightly so, on green economy, on sustainability from a point of using the resources more effectively, which is absolutely fine. It has to be there. What's probably the war has reminded us is the importance of the context. So we absolutely want to do and have a greener world. But if we're not in peace, if there is not the base condition to do that, then everything drops. So unfortunately, we are realizing this as it is happening. So once again, I agree with General. Now we need to run, and it will take time. So it's not something you can do in 2 minutes. But we're realizing that it's better to look at the 17 pillars altogether as a common guideline to a sustainable world, much more than focusing only on one portion, which is probably, even sexier to communicate about, because everybody, and we are putting a lot of efforts in, as company, in the sustainability in the sense of social, environment, and whatever, which is perfectly fine. But the whole society, and so I come back to the public opinion. Public opinion, we need to help understanding the importance of the context you live in. If the context is not right, everything else falls.
General, on the ESG criteria, do you notice a change, an evolution in the way of dealing with them since the war in Ukraine?
No, I think it's the same remark Gian Domenico just put. There is the conscience that security is probably the first pillar from the prerequisite for all the others, and again, my point would be to say. Defense industry is an industry like others, so let us have our specific ESG criteria. We can all produce in the respect of environment. We are developing new mobility solutions, for instance, which are probably more eco-friendly in the end, even if the primary objective is to for tactical reasons, furtivity and so. But yes, we can tackle every single ESG criteria specific to the defense industry, and I would say also for financing. Ideally, it's a bit optimistic, but ideally you should almost have labels for the finance. If you want to support the ecological transition, you will put your money in a fund that stands criteria ecological transition. You should have actually.
No, that's why it's linked with public opinion, because
Yes,
in fund
exactly.
it's saving
Exactly.
is from people. So at the
Exactly.
end, it's the money of people we can finance a weapon.
I would like to put my savings in a fund in a bank, stating my criteria are sovereignty, security. This should be in a normal world. It should be a very respected and eligible criteria, just alongside with the others. So I think we are far from that, but this could be an idealistic objective to reach.
Yeah. Last word, Lucas? It's okay.
No, I mean, I know we are running out of time,
Yeah,
so I concur with everything that was said. But I guess, I mean, we've been thinking about like a lot of different things. I guess when we go down the logical chain, it comes down to public opinion and how we can, with the right pedagogy, educate them on a more complex but more real understanding of the defense industry, its necessity, how sustainable it is. And if we manage to do that, eventually the rest will follow. Government, budget spending, the banks and all of that. So it comes down to the people, us as consumers.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Yeah, I'm sorry we're late. So thank you. We have a great overview of what defense is facing. We know that sustainability is what we need to foster. And you just said it. The first sustainable thing for people is just to keep existing. And so defense is our guarantee, and it depends of performance defense industry. So now what we are going to do with that, I think even if you build trucks, tanks, fighter plane, or even I as a communication agency, we just have a common responsibility to inform and raise awareness among bankers, among public opinion, that without fundings, there is not performance industry, and without defense, there is no peace. So thank you, all of you, and see you soon for another conference on another strategic issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much.